The creative sound blaster Katana V2 is arguably one of the most customizable pieces of equipment that you're ever going to come across. Now this soundbar can be found for around £300 in the UK, and in this review going to see if it's actually worth its price tag, and furthermore how it actually does in different sorts of scenarios, be it if you're a hardcore competitive gamer like myself, to someone who enjoys listening music in front of their desktop setup, or for example for those who want to plug it into their televisions and therefore know how it compares to other soundbars out there in the market that come in at roughly the same sort of price tag. Now to kick off this review I do have to talk about its design, because its somewhat compact form factor will be arguably one of its selling points for certain consumers, and indeed it's around 600mm long, 95mm wide and 62mm tall, therefore means it can fit in terms of most setups, at least in my opinion, and furthermore will also fit by a television. Now aside from its form factor, it's also pretty aesthetically pleasing, at least in my opinion, and here the soundbar has got a metal grille that fits around the soundbar and also protects the speakers both at the top and around the sides as well, and as for the rest of the finish, it's got a kind of brush aluminium type of look and also has a glossy type of panel that is sat at the front of the soundbar. Now this will give you all the right information when you are adjusting certain settings and or of course going through the volume increments. Now elsewhere, this soundbar does have those fabled RGB lights that certain gamers might like. Now this can be pretty much customized to the nth degree, and something I will showcase very shortly in the app section of this review. Now here you can go for the preset modes as well, and or if you so wish fully disable the lights if it's something that you do not want and or require. Now for you to interact with the soundbar, there's some physical buttons found at the top of it, and these allow some quick settings, but of course if you want an extension to this you'll probably want to revert to the remote control. Now this comes included with the soundbar. However, 2 AAA batteries do not come included, and as a result you'll have to purchase them separately. Now elsewhere, the soundbar's remote is pretty comprehensive. It gives you all the sort of customization that one might want on the fly. So now we get onto the Creative app, which provides a ridiculous amount of customization. Of course one can achieve this via the software on the computer, but if most want to just use a mobile app because it gives you the customization over your TV and also PC, well, you can do it via this. Now on the left hand side you can switch between outputs, between headphones and the speakers. At the right hand side you've got the inputs, so you've got a variety of those to choose from, and as for Bluetooth devices, well, you can use the one or pair it to your recently used device. As for the sound modes, now this is where it gets really in depth. Now you can choose between headphones and speakers and customize them individually, and then you've got a whole host of different sound modes which have been pre-made for you, but then you can customize your own. So for example, mine is onboard, which is actually dubbed, and here what you can see is that you can customize the acoustic engine to your heart's content. Now in my case I have surround at 35, I then have the crystallizer at 40, then have disabled smart volume and also dialogue plus. You can of course filter with these if you so wish, and yet again choose between headphones or speakers in terms of how you customize it. Now as for the global equalizer, you can also customize this as well, whereby you've got a bunch of different EQs over here. In my case I've created my own EQ which I've called dubbed EQ, which I'll just show you in just a second. Now in this mode you can see you've got the lighting which you can enable or disable, and you can customize and indeed choose which lighting mode that you want displayed. And then you've got the decoder where you've got normal, full and night, and this is using Dolby Audio, so it changes in terms of how the sound profile is used. Now yet again over here you can see if I can just save it, I can save as and dubbed, and there you go. It's so simple that I could just save the equalizer and the acoustic engine all to one profile, or indeed create a new one. Now this does have the Super X-Fi technology built in, but you will need something to decode that. In other words, you will need a USB dongle which will fit in the back of the soundbar and then allow you to use a Super X-Fi set of headphones. Now for the acoustic engine over here, if you click on it, you can see this is the same sort of settings that we had before, but what is interesting is the equalizer. So you can see I had dubbed EQ over here because there's a bunch of different EQs you can choose from, but dubbed EQ is the one that I like because it's the one I've fully customized. You can see in terms of my frequency range how I've played around with it, and of course it's very subjective, so it very much depends on your own sort of hearing profile and what you like to hear from
the soundbar. Now, as for crystal voice, if you were to use this is for the use of the microphone input, which is very useful, and therefore allows you to even set an equalizer for the microphone, which is completely separate from the output of the speakers and or headphone output of the soundbar. So then we've got scout mode, which you can enable or disable, but the only thing worth bearing in mind is if you do enable scout mode, it will disable certain things, such as, let's say, the equalizer or the acoustic engine. And that's because it's doing all the processing itself and thinking of what would be better applied if you are using scout mode. And this is really used for people who want to be using it in sort of a gaming environment. But even then, I think that scout mode is a little bit ridiculous and therefore would usually leave it disabled and therefore have your own settings that work best for yourself. Now, as for the lighting, if I tap on it, other than the preset modes that we had before, so for example, the motion modes, you can then customize the color, the speed, the direction, and even if it's going to be reacting to music and also the overall brightness of it, which yet again provides a whole host of customizations just for the RGB lights alone. Then you've got the decoder, which we touched upon already, so it's kind of doubling up. And then you've got the mixer, which effectively gives you the adjustment of the subwoofer, which you can adjust in terms of decibels, and also in terms of the overall speaker volume, in other words, how loud the soundbar is. And then finally, you can customize the buttons, which I previously referenced in terms of the remote control. And you've got C1 to C6 to choose from. So for example, over here, C1, we can choose a certain command. And if I do no action, well, it does no action. Or if I tap on it, it can be to, let's say, set the input or set the output or whatever it might be that you want. And of course, you can fully disable it if it's certain things that you do not want. So elsewhere through the app, if you tap the cog icon at the top right-hand side, you can yet again adjust the subwoofer volume. You can also enable or disable energy saving if it's something that you want, and also enable or disable HDMI CEC, which is quite handy for those people using it with a television. And then you can, of course, choose the different display modes, in other words, bright, dark, or off, and also check for any later firmware updates. And as you can see at the time of filming, I'm using the latest firmware. So all of this makes it very handy and complete with the app, and of course, linked with even the Superfly X technology via separate app. It means the level of customization is absolutely insane.
So now we get onto connectivity, and here I must say the Creative Katana V2 is very versatile. First off, in terms of inputs, you've got an auxiliary 3.5mm jack, you've also got optical, HDMI ARC, and also USB Type-C. On the latter, it supports 24 bits 96 kHz, which is pretty impressive, specifically when connected over to my Windows 10 machine. I had no problems in terms of outputting this resolution. Now, as for the other sort of connectivity options, you have of course got Bluetooth, where here you can connect over to, let's say, a smartphone, and here the SBC codec is supported only, which is slightly a shame, but at the same time, I don't suspect many people will be connecting over wireless to the soundbar, and if you are going to be doing so, just bear in mind that the overall audio fidelity will not be comparable to what you can achieve over a wired connection instead. Now, as for outputs, there is a subwoofer output at the back of the soundbar, which will be pretty obvious when you're setting up the soundbar, but elsewhere it does have Super X-Fi technology that can be achieved via either a USB dongle, so for example the Super X-Fi USB dongle that's then paired up to a set of wireless headphones which are provided by Creative, or for example, if you want to plug in a set of regular headphones, by that I mean via 3.5mm jack, you can achieve this Super X-Fi technology by plugging it in at the front of the soundbar. Now, Super X-Fi gives you that sort of spatial awareness and gives you a sense of sitting in front of a set of hi-fi speakers, which is somewhat of an interesting experience, one that I would definitely recommend trying for yourself. Now, of course, you don't have to use this if you don't want. You can disable Super X-Fi and have a somewhat stereo output instead, but if you want this kind of 3D spatial sound, you'll definitely want to download the Super X-Fi app, customize the sort of experience that you're getting by mapping your head and therefore getting a more personalized sound, and then effectively syncing it up to the soundbar via the Creative app, and then enabling the Super X-Fi by either pressing the button, going through the app, and or going through on the remote. Now, as for another feature, Creative have also integrated a dual microphone setup at the front of the soundbar, and indeed that's exactly what's coming across. The reason I'm facing the soundbar is because my voice will come a lot more clear in comparison to when I face away, as you will normally expect in most microphone setups. Now, the thing I will say over here is that whilst Creative's integration of a microphone setup is very useful for, let's say, conference calls or something that's not going to be overly distracting, The only thing to bear in mind over here is that if you have a mechanical keyboard and or let's say a mouse, and therefore you're going to be clicking away at it, then your recipient will be able to hear it just due to how the microphones are positioned. As a result, if you're a hardcore gamer and or person who's taking conference calls on a regular, then you might want to consider getting a boom microphone or a separate microphone altogether. Now thankfully, Creative have also integrated a 3.5mm headset connection. In other words, if you have a headset that has a 4-port connection, you can plug it in directly into the front of the soundbar and therefore use your microphone of your headset, where your Creative Katana V2 will pick that up, and therefore means that you'll get a little bit more clearer audio and one that won't be as distracting for your recipients. So in order to demonstrate to some extent its audio capabilities, we're going to go onto an audio demo. First off, we're going to go onto a music track. The song is from Priya J, it's titled Falling. You can find it down in the description below in case if you're interested in hearing it and or purchasing the song. And then we'll go to a piece to camera, whereby I'll be also presenting a car, which is the Bentley Bentayga Hybrid on Totally EV. And in case you want to see that review, do check it up on your pop banner, and of course do subscribe to Totally EV, as it would be also appreciated. Now it's just worth bearing in mind that you should look out for the annotations at the bottom screen of the video, because it'll give you an indication of how the soundbar is running, and therefore might give you a little bit of a taster as to how it might perform in your own setup.
Way back to falling from so high, falling from so high. The thing is, my imagination is constantly racing 1,000 miles ahead. I'm living in my own mind, but it's slow and I'm always hoping.
Even more intriguingly is that the Bentayga lineup actually accounts for 40% of sales from the Bentley vehicles, and therefore makes it the most popular and indeed successful luxury SUV on the market. Now we're just reviewing and seeing if it's actually worth its price tag, because unsurprisingly it comes in at an eye-watering £155,000, but that's without additional options, and such as the model that we have on review comes in at a whopping £190,000. So with the audio demo out of the way, let's get on to my subjective opinion. And first off, I do have to talk about that sub-bass extension. Now while it is present and therefore isn't exactly missing in terms of this soundbar, here I do find that the 50 Hz frequency range where it cuts off at means that you don't get that low pronounced bass. Here if I compare it to a regular soundbar such as the JBL Bar Deep Bass 2.1, it really can't compete and isn't comparable. However, in comparison to bookshelf setups, which do not have any subwoofer whatsoever, or indeed all-in-one soundbars that you might find out there in the market for your television, here the subwoofer inclusion will definitely be appreciated. Now as for the mid-bass, the overall quantity is certainly there and will keep you excited when you're listening back to your favorite tracks or watching movies or shows. But in terms of the overall quality, here I don't think it quite competes with a set of bookshelf speakers, for example ones that come from Edifier. Likewise, certain soundbars out there in the market, for example from the likes of Samsung, provide a better sort of mid-bass quality. So what about the mid-range? Well, here I feel that it's pretty recessed and pushed back. As a result, you get quite a V-shaped sound signature. Now you might be thinking, oh well, you could EQ this, you can just boost up the mid-range and therefore get better mid-range clarity and therefore have a bit more of a forward mid-range sound. However, once you do this, you'll find that the overall accuracy in the mid-range does really decrease. So for example, listening back to Priya J's track, if I were to increase the mid-range via the app, I just felt that the overall accuracy just completely decreased. So much so, I just accepted that the Creative Katana V2 has got a V-shaped sound signature, and as a result, I just have to bear that in mind. So onto the highs, here I feel that the Creative Katana V2 does a good job on the whole, specifically given the fact that it has the dedicated tweeters, and furthermore that through the app or via the software you can enable the crystallizer function. Here I feel that it just brings out the highs and gives a little bit more life to the soundbar, because without it, it just feels a little bit drowned out. Now here I had no problems whatsoever in terms of the top end extension, and furthermore furthermore, it wasn't sibilant or harsh no matter what sort of volume I was playing back my favorite tracks or indeed watching certain YouTube videos. So with the frequency range out of the way, we should talk about Soundstage, and this perfectly will lead me on to its gaming performance. Now I should mention that in comparison to a vast majority of the soundbars that you can find out there on the market, the Creative Katana V2 can't quite compete in terms of the overall width and depth and also the instrument separation. Here I feel that the overall size of the Creative Katana V2 limits in terms of what you can attain in terms of soundstage. However, when you are placed a lot closer to the soundbar and therefore using it in terms of a desktop setup, you'll find that you're going to be a lot more impressed by the overall soundstage, because here you're placed really close to the audio drivers and the overall instrument separation comes out a little bit better. Again, here I don't think it will quite compete with larger sized bookshelf speakers, but for a desktop setup, it's certainly impressive. So with all of that in mind, and of course it's all very much relevant to gaming, we get onto the dedicated gaming section of this review. Now here I'll be placing my microphone in front of the soundbar, which I know won't be quite ideal because you'll be able to hear my clicks and also my keyboard presses, but nevertheless hopefully it'll capture some of the game audio and give you a little bit of a rough indication of how it does. So hopefully the audio demo was somewhat useful, but here what I will say subjectively is that the overall positional cues that I attained from the Katana V2 were seriously impressive. It allowed me to really know where the enemies were, such as in CSGO Deathmatch where an enemy is spawning, I can hear the pop-up come up and it's quite easy to snap towards their head. Hitting them is a complete different task altogether because my aim was completely off while filming this video. But nevertheless, when it comes to gaming positioning, here the Creative Katana V2 definitely stands out in comparison to other soundbars on the market, making it arguably the best soundbar for gaming. In comparison to bookshelf speakers, however, I do feel that it's somewhat on par, but here certain bookshelf speakers that are slightly larger provide a little bit better sort of spatial awareness because of the overall soundstage that they offer, and as a result the Creative Katana V2 can't quite compete in comparison to more expensive or premium bookshelf setups that one can attain on your desktop. So with all of that information that you've hopefully soaked up throughout this review, we get onto my verdict. And I'm going to break it down in terms of the three consumer groups, at least from what I deem at the Creative Katana V2 being aimed at. Now first off, for those people who are going to be using it in front of a television, here I feel that the Creative can't quite compete with other soundbar systems out there on the market. From JBL, Samsung, Panasonic, among a few others, they'll provide a better overall sonic reproduction and as a result will be a bettered experience over the Creative Katana V2. Here its form factor kind of lets it down in this department. Now as for those people who will be using it on a desktop setup, I have to talk about audio files first. For those people who are just going to be wanting music listing and are not too fussed about RGB light or the sort of gaming functionalities of it, here I feel that bookshelf speakers will be a better bet. Be it those that have a subwoofer output or not, the bookshelf speakers will provide you better audio fidelity, specifically when it comes to the mid-range tones, and the overall spatial sound that you might be able to attain from larger bookshelf speakers will be better than the Creative Katana V2. So now we get onto the final category, gamers. Now don't get me wrong, you could be a gamer watching movies on a big sized monitor, and you can also be someone who's playing games or listening to music. But for gamers here, I think the Creative Katana V2 provides a seriously interesting proposition. Not only is it fully versatile in terms of the inputs that it has, even in terms of outputs via the 3.5mm headphone jack output, which a lot of bookshelf speakers or even regular speakers that you can find for your desktop just do not offer, but it also does a good job in terms of positional cues, which is of course one of the most important factors when it comes to gaming. If you're a serious hardcore gamer or, for example, a casual gamer, positional cues are very important, and here the Creative Katana V2, when sat up close to it, does a great job. So with that in mind, I do feel that the Creative Katana V2 has a somewhat niche and makes it an interesting proposition, but I'd be intrigued to hear your thoughts in a comment section below as to why or if you would consider the Katana V2 over some of its alternatives. Now, if you've liked this independent, detailed review, definitely do consider dropping a like and subscribing and hitting that bell notification if you haven't already, as it would be all greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.